Well, good morning. Hello, everybody. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. I am so glad to be with you. My name is Michelle Yeun, and I am the pastor of operations, and I am so grateful to be part of the Crossing Church and to have been on staff for 12 years. And so I am excited this morning to be sharing with you a little bit out of Psalm 95 and just how God is prompting me just to share something with you. So as we begin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read Psalm 95. And the reason I'm reading from Psalm 95 is because Pastor Tim, he preached from it this past weekend. If you missed the message, I would encourage you to go back on Facebook or YouTube and watch it. I watched it 3 times and I was so encouraged by what he said, and I know that it will encourage you and really prompt you to just trust God more. So please go back and watch that. So let's read together in Psalm 95, and then we will discuss a little bit together. So Psalm 95, come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. Today, if only you would hear his voice. Do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day at Massa in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested me. They tried me, though they had seen what I did. For 40 years, I was angry with that generation. I said, they are a people whose heart go astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. So today is Friday, and the method that we have been following is the SOAP method: scripture, observation, application, and prayer. And today we are talking about prayer. So as I read the scripture, there is one verse that I read that jumps out to me personally and prompts me to think about prayer, which is what I want to share with you today. And that is at the end of verse 7, and it says, today, if only you would hear my voice. And then it goes on to say, do not harden your hearts as you did in Meribah. Let me read that again. It says, today, if only you would hear his voice. And so when I think about prayer and look at this part of the verse, it reminds me to think about listening to God's voice. Now, you may wonder, what does that have to do with prayer? And I've never heard God's voice before. But I think that there are many opportunities for us to listen to God in prayer, but often we don't engage in the practice of doing that. And that is especially true for even me. I grew up in a Christian family. I grew up going to church, and I remember I accepted Christ when I was 9 years old with my Sunday school teacher. So shout out to all of those who work in children's ministry and invest their time in kids. But I remember learning how to pray as a child. And many of you maybe learned how to pray that way too. It was ACTS, A-C-T-S, another acronym: adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. But it was all a one-way dialogue. It was me just going through these things and telling God these things. And that's how I learned how to pray. And that may be similar to how many of you or how many of us pray. I know I did that way for a long time. It was just me telling God what I was thankful for, what I wanted, and what I needed, which is great. It's a great way to approach God and to cover all those things. But these last 10 years, I would say, I have learned something called listening prayer. And it has forever changed the way I pray. And there are times when I come to God and share with him, hey, this is why I love you. This is what I'm thankful for. This is what I need. But there are seasons, there are moments when I need to engage in listening prayer. And I just want to share with you a little bit about what that looks like for me. Maybe some of you do listening prayer and it's different. And I would love to hear from you in the comments how you do it differently. But for me, listening prayer, it has to do with listening, which means calming the tongue and putting my requests at bay for a moment. So usually it starts off with me being intentional about it and setting some time aside. And that's a little bit more obvious than you think, because a lot of times our prayers are short. They last minutes. They're quick shootouts to God. But how rich is a relationship with your friend when you plan to meet up with them for 2 minutes? Like, I would never do that with a friend. If I were meeting up with them to spend time with them, to not only share what's going on in my life, but to really listen in from them, I would spend at least an hour with them, maybe 2 hours, so that we had adequate time to share back and forth. Now, I'm not suggesting that any of us dive into spending an hour or 2 hours listening to God, but I would say plan on spending 10 minutes, 12 minutes the first time to listen to God. And so what I do is I sit with this time carved out. And the first thing I do is I have to calm down. Our brains, my brain, is often spinning with ideas and thoughts and concerns and anxiety, all these things. And I just need to take a moment, maybe even a couple of minutes, just to slow down and to breathe and to exhale and just to relax my mind and get my body into a place where I am ready to slow down. After I've slowed down, what I do is I just take notice of what is the thought in my mind that comes most to the surface. And that's usually the thing that is most worrisome to me, that is most bothersome to me. And I take that thought. Let's say it is just a fear of like a health issue. Okay, let's say I have a health issue that I'm just have a lot of anxiety around. So that thought pops right to the top. I take that thought, I kind of like hold it as if it were an object, and I look at it from different angles, and I notice, what is my mind saying about this thing? What am I afraid of when I think about my health? What are other people saying about my health? What bothers me the most about my health? Why am I always thinking? So I ask myself all these questions, and I try to gather all of the thoughts that I have been thinking about this thing. And I bring it all up to God, because these thoughts matter. God cares about each one of these thoughts. And it's important that we even acknowledge how we feel about this thing, this concern that we have. And then what I do is I offer it to God. I ask God, what do you have to say about my health? And that's when I sit and I listen. I sit and I listen. And usually God will say something in a quiet voice. He will prompt me in a song that I've heard. He will remind me of a scripture that I know in my heart. And he will tell me something that is true, because often my thoughts about this thing, which is my health, my what other people say, the anxiety that I have wrapped around it, it is not true. It is not of God. And so I allow a moment for God to speak to that. And I give it some time, because sometimes it takes time for my thoughts to be quieted to create space for God to speak. So I do that. And after that, when I sense that I've heard from God, then in my journal or on my piece of paper that I have in front of me, I like to jot down what I've heard from God, just so later I can come back and I can look at it and remember what He said to me. So I do that with that one thing, and then I lay that idea, that thought aside, and then I sit again and I try to just notice what is the second thing that comes up in my heart. And I do this practice over and over again with each thing. I take the thing, I examine it from the different angles. What am I thinking? What are people saying? What are my concerns about it? And then I give space, a couple minutes, for God to speak to it. And then I like to write it down afterwards. Another thing I like to do after I am done with all these things is I like to share what I heard from God with a trusted friend that is also someone who follows Jesus. And so it's really neat to be able to share it with a friend, because often, like, I use them as a sounding board. Like, I say, this is what I was sharing with God, and this is what He said to me, and they will confirm for me and affirm for me, like, oh wow, that's really cool that God is saying, or yes, that is so true, or I'm so glad to hear that God is encouraging you and reminding you of these fundamental truths of who you are and who He is and how He's working in your life. So that is how I like to do listening prayer. And I know it's a lot, and I would encourage you, just try it out sometime. Maybe it's only 10 minutes or 15 minutes, but God has so much to say to all of us. He has so much to say to you. He wants to speak to you. And if you have any questions about it, I would encourage you to drop a note in the comments. I would love to encourage you in your journey on listening prayer. And I believe that God has so much for each one of us as we continue to develop our relationship with Him. And so I just want to remind all of us that this weekend we are kicking off a new series called OMG, Oh My God. And this really lines up with prayer, because there are over 20 instances in the Bible where somebody literally said the words, oh my God, asking God for help. And so I'm really looking forward to what we will learn as we kick off this new series this weekend. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you online this weekend.